Red Skelton was known as America's favorite
laugh
clown,
for 20
always
years
playing
on
the
television.
happy entertainer, the silly drunk, or the innocent childlike character. But behind the painted smile was a man carrying deep pain and secrets that few people knew about. The crew members who worked closely with him saw a different side during private rehearsals they called the Red Skelton Dirty Hour. When he died, lawyers found a shocking clause in his will that could have destroyed everything he had worked for. The real story of this beloved comedian was much darker than anyone imagined. Red Skelton entered the world already marked by tragedy. He was born on July 18, 1913, in Vincennes, Indiana, just 2 months after his father died. His father, Joseph Ehart, had been a circus clown who left that life to become a grocer, hoping for something more stable. But fate had other plans. Joseph died in a circus tent collapse, pulled back into the very world he had tried to escape. This single event shattered the Skelton family completely. The family was left with nothing. Red's mother, Ida May, found herself alone with 4 children to raise and no money to do it. Their poverty was crushing and visible to everyone in town. Neighbors didn't whisper about their situation. They talked about it openly. Ida took any work she could find, scrubbing floors and running elevators, doing whatever was needed to keep her family alive. She worked until it broke her down physically and emotionally, but she never gave up. The Skelton family wasn't just poor, they were seen as hopeless by the community. Parents in town told their daughters to stay away from Red because they believed he had no future. These harsh words and judgmental stares could have destroyed a young boy, but instead they pushed Red to prove everyone wrong. At just 7 years old, he began working as a newspaper boy, standing on the streets of Vincennes, and shouting headlines. He didn't do this because he enjoyed it, but because his family desperately needed every penny he could earn. Working on those street corners taught Red more than any classroom ever could. He learned to read people's faces and figure out how to make them smile. He discovered that laughter got attention, and attention meant sales. This early lesson about the power of humor would stay with him for the rest of his life. He wasn't just selling newspapers, he was learning the art of performance. When Red was 10 years old, something incredible happened that changed his life forever. He was outside the Pantheon Theater selling papers when a famous comedian named Ed Wynn spotted him. Wynn bought every newspaper Red had and then took the boy inside the theater. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It opened up an entirely new world for Red. Wynn showed him what show business looked like from behind the scenes. It was fast, bright, and exciting. In that moment, a door cracked open for a poor boy with no father and seemingly no future. That encounter gave Red a dream, and he chased it with everything he had. Right after meeting Wynn, Red made a life-changing decision. He quit school. He didn't ease into show business gradually. Instead, he jumped in completely by joining Doc Lewis's patent medicine show. These weren't glamorous performances. They were part sales pitch and part traveling circus, moving from town to town selling fake cures while entertaining crowds. At just 10 years old, Red traveled across Indiana, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri with the medicine show. He wasn't treated like a child. He worked like a grown man, night after night, learning what it really meant to be a performer. His mother once said that Red didn't run away from home. His destiny simply caught up with him. By age 14, he had moved on to more serious theatrical work, joining the John Lawrence Stock Company and performing in dramatic plays under canvas tents. Red was making $15 a week, which felt like a fortune to someone who had grown up with nothing. However, there was a problem. No matter how hard he tried to deliver serious dramatic lines, the audience always laughed. He was supposed to make them cry or feel moved by the drama, but instead they found him naturally funny. The company noticed this too and decided to let him go. They abandoned him at a cheap hotel by the Missouri River, unpaid and alone. This could have been the end of Red's show business dreams, but he refused to give up. A few days later, he discovered the Cotton Blossom, a showboat drifting down the river that still held on to the old traditions of river entertainment. Red talked his way aboard and found himself doing everything: dancing, singing, telling jokes, and even performing in blackface like other entertainers of that era. Every night brought new challenges and different crowds that had to be won over. He learned to adapt quickly, work incredibly hard, and never let a quiet audience stay quiet for long. That showboat saved Red's career and trained him better than any formal education could have. By age 15, he was no longer a beginner but a seasoned vaudeville performer. He had experience with medicine shows, showboats, burlesque circuits, blackface minstrel acts, and had even worked in the circus, following in his father's footsteps as a clown while going even further. Some nights he worked as master of ceremonies at Depression-era dance marathons, where couples danced until they collapsed from exhaustion, competing for prize money. Red never stayed still and did whatever it took to keep moving and working. In 1930, Kansas City brought something different into Red's life. A 16-year-old girl named Edna Stillwell. She was working as an usher at the Pantages Theater when Red was hosting a dance marathon. Edna entered the competition and not only danced, but won it. Afterward, she boldly told Red that his jokes weren't good enough. This honest criticism got his attention in a way that flattery never could. A year later, Red and Edna married, and she became much more than just his wife. Edna became his manager, his writer, and his protector. She negotiated better pay for him, helped him study to get his high school diploma, and wrote many of his jokes. Even after their divorce 13 years later, she continued writing material for him because she understood his comedic rhythm better than anyone else ever would. Their biggest breakthrough came from observing a simple scene in a Montreal diner. They watched people dip donuts into their coffee and were struck by this odd little habit. This observation sparked an idea that became the Donut Dunkers sketch, a pantomime act where Red showed different ways people dunk their donuts. It was completely ridiculous and absolutely brilliant at the same time. Audiences loved it immediately. The success of this sketch got them booked at Loew's State Theater in New York in 1937, putting them in the big leagues of entertainment. That one simple routine carried Red into radio, movies, and eventually even the White House, where President Roosevelt invited him to perform. Soon after, Red became the host of Roosevelt's birthday events, cementing his place in American entertainment. Red's rise in show business hit a major turning point in 1937, when one radio appearance changed everything. He performed his Donut Dunkers routine on the Fleischmann's Yeast Hour with Rudy Vallee. Even though it was simple pantomime, it lit up the airwaves and generated an overwhelming response. Fan letters poured in, and he was invited back 2 more times that year. Suddenly, Red wasn't just a stage performer anymore. He had become a radio star. In October 1938, NBC made his success official by naming him the new host of Avalon Time, replacing Red Foley. Behind the scenes, Edna shaped much of the material, working as his main writer and creative partner. Their teamwork helped Red stand out from other performers. His voice work, character development, and physical comedy adapted surprisingly well to radio, taking him into an entirely new world of entertainment. By 1941, Red was ready for something even bigger. The Raleigh cigarette program launched on October 7th and instantly became a nationwide hit. This show introduced some of Red's most famous characters that would become part of American culture. Junior, the mean Whittle Kid, became a national obsession with his catchphrase, "I dood it," appearing everywhere. Newspapers even used it in war headlines, with one reading, "Do Little Dood It," after the famous raid on Tokyo. Kids loved the character so much, they helped fund a bomber plane called We Dood It. Another creation, Clem Cadiddlehopper, was based on a real neighbor from Indiana that Red remembered from his childhood. Ozzie and Harriet Nelson joined the show too, along with comedian Wonderful Smith, adding depth and helping shape the show's comedy style. The successful run ended in June 1944 when Red was drafted into the Army, but by then, he had already left a permanent mark on American culture. Red's movie career had begun earlier, in 1938, with his debut in Having Wonderful Time, a light comedy set at a summer camp. He shared the screen with major stars like Ginger Rogers and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., playing Itchy Faulkner, the camp's chaotic social director. Most of his scenes were cut from the final version, but even in this reduced role, Red made a strong impression. Critics noticed his perfect timing and natural energy. From that point on, Red became a fixture at MGM Studios. Between 1938 and 1951, he appeared in over 30 films, including Ship Ahoy in 1941 with Eleanor Powell and Burt Lahr, and Bathing Beauty in 1944, which was originally written for Red, but is remembered for making Esther William as a star. In 1948, he starred in The Fuller Brush Man, playing a door-to-door salesman caught up in a murder plot. Bathing Beauty was especially memorable with its vibrant Technicolor scenes and elaborate swimming sequences choreographed by Busby Berkeley. Red's characters perfectly blended comedy with genuine emotion, and audiences loved this combination. His style was different from other comedians, warm, silly, and full of heart. This unique approach made him one of MGM's most reliable comedy stars throughout the 1940s. The same year the Raleigh cigarette program began, Red also starred in Whistling in the Dark. It was a big year for him, as he was voted the top new radio star of 1941, beating out legends like Jack Benny and Fred Allen. What made Red different from other comedians was his completely clean humor that worked for every age group. He never told dirty jokes or got involved in politics, just created funny, strange characters that families could laugh at together. Everything changed again in March 1944 when Red was drafted into the Army. At the time, he was at the absolute peak of his radio career. The Raleigh cigarette program aired every Tuesday night at 10:30 and was one of the highest-rated shows in the country. His sponsors desperately wanted to keep him, and MGM tried to get him a deferment, but it didn't work. His final show aired on June 6, 1944, and the very next day he became Private Skelton. The war made no exceptions for celebrities. Red didn't receive any special treatment and trained like any other soldier. However, there was one difference. He was constantly being asked to perform for the troops. Between military drills, he did comedy shows, sometimes as many as 12 in a single day. This exhausting schedule wore him down quickly. In his personal diary, Red described feeling faint during performances and forgetting parts of his act. He covered up these problems, but the warning signs were clearly there. In April 1945, he was sent to Italy, where in 1 month alone he performed 41 shows in just 6 days. While the soldiers loved him and chaplains said he lifted their spirits, Red was running on empty. His body and mind were giving out under the pressure. Then came the collapse. Red broke down completely in Naples and had to be rushed home and admitted to a military hospital, where he stayed for 3 months. The public never really heard the full story of what happened, as newspapers gave it only gentle coverage. Inside the hospital, Red was deeply shaken and developed a stutter that made it difficult for him to perform with his usual ease. One day in the hospital, Red noticed a fellow soldier who wouldn't talk to anyone. Red tried making him laugh, and that small moment helped him start healing from his own trauma. However, the emotional scars didn't disappear. In September 1945, he was officially discharged from the Army. Red later joked that he was the only celebrity who went in as a private and came out as a private, but the experience had changed him permanently. The breakdown left lasting effects that would follow him for the rest of his life. The stutter lingered, and so did the emotional pain. His discharge papers were signed on September 24th, ending the war chapter of his life, but something inside him had shifted forever. Still, Red didn't waste any time getting back to work. By December 4, 1945, just 10 weeks after leaving the Army, he was back on the air with the Raleigh cigarette program. Fans were thrilled to have him back, but those closest to him noticed significant changes. Red was still funny and sharp, but now there was something much darker beneath the surface. He laughed less when he wasn't performing and withdrew more often from social situations. His new characters had a deeper, more complex edge that reflected someone who had been through rough, real trauma. When Red Skelton's television show first aired on NBC on September 30, 1951, it didn't just fill another time slot. It exploded onto television screens across America. Red was already a major star on radio and in films, and millions of people were eager to see how he would perform on this new medium called television. Thanks to new coaxial cable technology, people across the entire United States could watch the broadcast at the same time, creating a shared national experience. In the very first episode, Red ended his monologue by getting yanked off stage by 2 invisible hands. It was a hilarious bit that caused him real injuries, forcing him to drop it from future shows. Still, the impact of that first episode was massive. By the end of its first season, the show ranked number 4 across all television networks. At the 1952 Emmy Awards, Red won Best Comedian, and his show won Best Comedy, beating Milton Berle, who had always dominated television comedy. In 1954, Red made a smart move by taking his show to CBS, which gave him more airtime and creative freedom. By 1962, the show had expanded to a full hour and became a regular part of Tuesday nights for families across the country. It stayed in the top 20 shows for nearly 20 years, and in the mid-1960s, it even hit number 2 in national ratings. Red didn't just lead in comedy, he also pushed boundaries in television technology. Between 1955 and 1960, he paid for color broadcasts out of his own pocket, even though CBS was still cautious about making the switch. The show was undeniably successful, but in 1970, CBS canceled it. This wasn't because of poor ratings, the show was still strong, but because the network wanted to attract younger viewers. Red's audience was older, and that didn't fit CBS's new demographic plans. One of Red's most beloved characters came early in his TV run. In 195, he introduced Freddie the Freeloader, a silent clown who lived in a shack but always smiled despite having almost nothing. Freddie was based on Red's memories of his father, who had been a circus clown before dying when Red was so young. Red poured his heart into this character because it wasn't just an act, it was part of who he really was. Freddie never complained about his situation and always believed something good was coming, even when things looked completely hopeless. Red once said that Freddie was the purest of all his creations. The sketches where Freddie didn't speak, called the silent spot, became a signature element of the show. Red used only his face, hands, and body movements to tell complete stories without saying a word. Behind the scenes, Red's life took a devastating turn on May 10, 1958, when his son Richard died of leukemia, just 10 days before his 10th birthday. This tragedy completely shattered the Skelton family. Richard didn't even know how seriously ill he was because Red and his wife Georgia tried to protect him from the terrible truth, but his little body couldn't handle the endless blood transfusions. In his final hours, with an IV in his leg and bruises covering his body, Richard asked his father for one last favor. He said, "Daddy, will you get Mama that red blanket for Mother's Day?" Even as he was dying, he wasn't thinking about himself, but about his mother. Those were some of his last words before falling into a coma. At 8:36 p.m., he died while Red and Georgia stayed by his side in the hospital room, surrounded by his toys and the stuffed dog he had loved since he was 6 years old. On Richard's last full day, Red had brought a Sears catalog to the hospital and told his son to pick anything he wanted for his birthday. The boy chose camping gear, a tent, and that red blanket, but he made it clear the blanket wasn't for him, it was for his mother. He also said he didn't want a big birthday party, just a simple cookout with a few friends. Even while dying, Richard thought of others before himself. After Richard's death, Red couldn't bear to change his son's room at all. He left everything exactly the same. The toys, the packed bag, everything. He often sat in there alone, quietly falling into deep depression. The overwhelming grief didn't stay private forever and began showing up in his work and affecting his marriage. Red and Georgia had held each other together for Richard's sake, but once he was gone, their shared sorrow drove a wedge between them that eventually ended their marriage. Most fans never knew that Red was also a serious painter who had started creating art at age 5 while traveling with his mother during her work with the circus. The circus had become his world after his father died, and Red painted clowns throughout his life, some cheerful, some lonely. These weren't random pieces, but were deeply connected to the characters he played, including Freddie the Freeloader. By the 1980s, Red's paintings were selling for over $80,000 each, and his lithographs were making millions annually. Some art experts believe he made more money from painting than from his entire television career. His artwork ended up in private collections around the world, creating a successful second career that barely anyone saw coming, but it had always been there, just beneath the surface of his public persona. Red had another surprising secret. He never drank alcohol, yet he was famous for playing convincing drunks on stage. His Guzzler's Gin sketch helped launch his television career, and viewers were completely convinced he had first-hand experience with alcohol. The truth was that he was actually allergic to alcohol and couldn't even sip it. But that didn't stop him from perfecting these drunk characters by carefully watching real alcoholics on the streets during his early years in vaudeville. The wholesome image Red presented to the public didn't always match the man backstage. During private rehearsals with Martha Raye and other close friends, Red often unleashed dirty jokes and wild sarcasm. These private sessions became legendary among the crew and were called the Red Skelton Dirty Hour. Red would riff on every topic, even ones he would never touch during his actual performances. In 1970, CBS made a decision that crushed Red personally and professionally. They canceled The Red Skelton Show, even though it was still ranking number 7 in its final season. This wasn't about ratings or performance, it was about image and demographics. The network had decided to cut ties with anything they saw as too rural or too old-fashioned. This move became known as the rural purge, and in one sweep, they canceled not only Red's show but also the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Mayberry RFD. CBS President Fred Silverman wanted younger, urban audiences and didn't care about ratings, legacy, or audience loyalty. This brutal shift in television history replaced family favorites with edgier shows like All in the Family and MASH, leaving millions of loyal fans feeling abandoned. Red was performing in Las Vegas when he heard the news and said, "My heart has been broken." For 17 out of his 20 years on television, his show had ranked in the top 10, but CBS didn't care about his decades of service. Even after the cancellation, Red kept performing, doing up to 70 live shows a year, but the pain of being discarded by the industry he had helped build never left him. He told his wife Lothian, "I'm mad that they didn't understand that I still had something to give." NBC tried to bring him back for one more season in 1970, but they changed everything about the show. It was cut from an hour to 30 minutes, moved from Tuesday nights to Mondays, and given a cold, dark set with young actors who disrupted the natural flow. Red held his ground even as the comedy world changed around him. He never gave in to vulgarity and refused to add shock value or swearing to his act. He said, "I'm not going to have my audience and their mothers, fathers, children, and grandchildren hear me recite what they can read on bathroom walls." While other comedians adapted to changing times, Red stuck to clean humor, which made him seem old-fashioned to some, but he didn't care because he believed his audience deserved respect. Then came a shock that no one expected. In 1980, 13 of his former writers filed a lawsuit after discovering that Red had written a clause in his will stating that all tapes of The Red Skelton Show should be destroyed when he died. If carried out, this would have meant no reruns, no syndication, and no residual payments for the writers. It would have erased decades of work completely. Red's personal life continued to be filled with heartache. On May 10, 1976, his ex-wife Georgia Davis took her own life with a gun in the backyard of her home in Rancho Mirage, California. The date was not a coincidence. It was the anniversary of their son Richard's death. Georgia had never recovered from losing Richard and battled alcoholism and depression for years. Their marriage hadn't survived the grief, and they divorced in 1971. In 1973, Red married again. His new wife, Lothian Toland, was the daughter of legendary cinematographer Greg Toland. Red was 60, and she was 36 when they married. They moved to a quiet ranch in Anza, California, where they raised horses and tended bonsai trees while avoiding Hollywood and its noise. Lothian became Red's source of peace, and he wrote her letters every day throughout their marriage. Even without weekly television, Red never stopped entertaining people. He performed around 70 shows every year at venues like Carnegie Hall, college auditoriums, and casinos. He also continued painting, focusing on clown subjects that collectors loved and that sometimes sold for over $80,000. He was earning up to $2.5 million a year from his art alone. But behind the scenes, the sadness from losing his son in Georgia never left him. He poured this grief into his work, and every smile he gave his audience was earned through personal sorrow. Red Skelton died on September 17, 1997, at age 84 from pneumonia at Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage. His final years were quiet but not idle. He continued painting and performing but never fully recovered from his losses. Friends said he never got his complete joy back after the tragedies in his life. His clown paintings, often bright and colorful on the outside, carried something much darker underneath, like portraits of a man who lived to make others laugh while privately mourning. Red's legacy lives on through institutions like the Red Skelton Museum of American Comedy, which opened in his hometown of Vincennes, Indiana, in 2013 on what would have been his 100th birthday. The museum holds his scripts, costumes, rare footage, over 200 paintings, and personal items donated by Lothian. It also hosts events like the America's Clown Award and the Laughter Film Festival. The characters Red created, Clem Cadiddlehopper, Freddie the Freeloader, and the Mean Whittle Kid, weren't just gags but had real heart and life that became part of American culture. His style shaped comedy and influenced performers like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey. The Red Skelton Show ran for 20 years, won multiple Emmys, and became a fixture in homes across the country. Even now, his work continues to echo through entertainment, proving that his laughter and legacy truly live on.